Hi everybody, welcome back to AP Psychology with me, your teacher, Miss Baines, where you, my students, learn the new content for the very first time. So go ahead and grab your felt tip pens, get nice and cozy. This is going to be the very last installment of the learning unit. Okay, so don't forget to grab those ever important binder notes for Unit 4. Video 5 called Observational Learning. I'll see you on the other side. Hi everybody, welcome back. This is the easiest set of notes that you probably got all year long. And it's totally intuitive and makes sense. And you should pick up all of this stuff quite easily and hopefully retain it for the rest of your time in this class. Okay, so as you can see on the learning targets, today is everything about observational learning and social and cognitive factors in observational learning or social learning theory. All of those things are describing the same sort of thing, which is the basic premise that we learn by observing others. So observational learning describes the process of learning through watching other people, retaining the information that you just saw, and then replicating the behaviors that were observed. For example, think about how a child might watch his or her parents waving at one another when the baby is an infant. And then after a few times of seeing them repeat this pattern of waving, the baby, him or herself, starts to wave, right? And learns that if they wave, somebody will wave back. There's even a game for it with little kids, right? Monkey see, monkey do. I touch my ears, I wiggle my nose, and so do you. And then mommy does a series of different funny things and makes funny faces, and the baby mirrors it back. That is all part of observational learning from the earliest moments of a child's life. Sometimes observational learning is also referred to as shaping or modeling, or other people call it vicarious reinforcement.
For something to be vicarious, it has to be something that is experienced through another person. For example, many parents want to live vicariously through their children, hence why they may push their children to do the things they never got to do, like pursue medical or law school. In psychology, reinforcement is a way to recognize and reward desirable behavior in hopes that it will continue. Now, let's put the two together. Vicarious reinforcement is our tendency to repeat or duplicate behaviors for which others are being rewarded. Imagine this. You and a coworker are given the same task to do. One day you feel particularly lazy and are struggling to focus on the task at hand. Your supervisor comes in and notices, but instead of reprimanding you, she praises and thanks your coworker for continuing to be diligent. She mentions how she will not forget his work ethic during next week's performance review. You start to pick up the pace. As you can see, vicarious reinforcement may be used at times that someone is acting out in a mild or non-destructive way. This method would not work if a person had issues with authority or had other underlying issues. While this was a productive use of vicarious reinforcement, some may misuse this strategy. Let's look at some more examples. Here is an example of the productive use of vicarious reinforcement. Jen and Kelly are both in first grade. They both have to work on puzzles individually, but they are sitting next to each other. The teacher sees that Jen is just turning the pieces upside down and then right side up over and over again. Kelly, however, is actually trying to put the pieces together, although with limited success. The teacher comes over to both of them and says, "Kelly, it's great that you are trying. That's the only way to piece the puzzle together. Here's a sticker for your effort." Jen notices and attempts to put the puzzle together as well. When used correctly, vicarious reinforcement is a motivator. Here is an example of questionable use of vicarious reinforcement. Tim is a Little League football player who is being rewarded and praised for acting aggressively and using his anger in the game. Seeing this, his teammates think this is a desirable way to act. They start following suit. While this may be effective on the football field, it is not desirable in mainstream society. If children learn that aggression is desirable and are not able to figure out that this rule does not always apply, it can cause issues with their behavior in other settings. Here's an example of misuse of vicarious reinforcement. Johnny and Brian, both fourth graders, are both working hard on a project. The teacher comes over but only praises Johnny for his work. Initially, Brian works even harder. The teacher continues to give Johnny a sticker and praises him repeatedly, although Brian is now working harder than Johnny. 20 minutes later, Brian's performance declines significantly because he sees that no matter how hard he works, he doesn't get praise. He becomes distracted by a dry erase board and leaves his project entirely. If a child is sincerely trying his best but cannot seem to reach the level of accomplishment that all the other children can, vicarious reinforcement may be damaging.
Think of how a child also might watch his mom or her mom iron the laundry or fold the clothes. I'll never forget when my daughter was a baby, I had some people come over who knew me my entire life, so they were like a second pair of parents. And it was raining outside, and they came in, and my little 12-month-old baby just learned how to walk, and she was running around in a t-shirt and a diaper, and saw that my friend came into the house with an umbrella and all wet, and she handed her a blow dryer, a toy blow dryer, and said, "Here, wet," right? She had seen me blow drying my hair, and one of the toys in a kit came with a little baby plastic blow dryer, and she handed it to the lady, and she just thought that was the cutest thing, that a little baby would know what a blow dryer was for. And I thought it was pretty cute too. But the point is, she learned that by watching me with my blow dryer, right? And she knew that when she sees me with wet hair, that I put that thing up against my head. So the process of watching and imitating others, monkey see, monkey do, tends to be the most common during early childhood. Children learn from the authority figures and their peers and friends in their lives. It also plays an important role in the socialization process, as children learn how to behave and respond to other children by observing how their parents and other caregivers interact with each other. Okay, so by watching how other people interact with each other, kids practice that and play all sorts of dress up and games pretending to be grown-ups. So for example, one little girl or boy might see his or her mother doing laundry and folding laundry, and even though they might not have the motor skills, the fine motor skills in their fingers to do precision folding to make it so it fits into a drawer nicely, they'll try, right? They'll fold the laundry in all sorts of shapes and piece it together, and it will be a really cute moment where the mom notices that the little kid is trying to imitate her. Or maybe if a young couple goes on a date to a Chinese restaurant, the babies sit and watch how all the other diners in the restaurant are eating with chopsticks, and they want to copy those actions and want to learn how to use these different utensils. Or a boy might watch another boy on the playground getting in trouble for hitting a little girl, and he learns from observing that interaction that he doesn't want to get in trouble, so he's not going to hit the little girls and boys that are his friend group. He noticed that that kid got punished, and he doesn't want a punishment. So it's never too early to learn, and kids start mirroring back behavior as early as their first weeks in life. Okay, as soon as they make eye contact with their parents. Another way of learning with children with monkey see, monkey do would be something like playing a game. One child joins a group but has never played a game before, say hide and go seek. Okay, and after observing the other children playing for a little while, she may learn very quickly the basic rules of the game and just join in and follow along. So mirror neurons, well, in the 1980s and 1990s, a group of Italian neurophysiologists at the University of Parma in Italy was studying neuronal activity by placing electrodes directly on the cortex of macaque monkeys. The monkey would reach for the food, and as the monkey reached for the food, the whole screen lit up with the firing of a neuron. Interestingly, the researchers found that these cells lit up and fired when the monkey saw somebody else pick up a piece of food, a human being pick up a piece of food. So mirroring that activity, right? By mirroring the same activity, the same thing happens in the brain, whether the monkey is doing it himself or the monkey is imitating somebody else, or if the monkey is just watching somebody do an activity. Interesting, right? In 2010, researchers were able to directly record the electrical activity of the surfaces of the brains in people who underwent brain surgery. Again, neuron activity was being detected, and that supported the findings of the RMRI findings of mapping out the different functionalities of different parts of the brain. The idea that the network contributes in this part of the brain to empathy, for example, has been referred to as the mirror neuron system, which seems to mainly involve regions in the frontal and parietal lobes in human beings. The brain regions that they themselves are associating with pain. So watching your friend suffering in pain has a biological reaction in your own brain if you're an empathic person. Observational learning with psychologist Albert Bandura. He was most known for his studies that he did with Bobo the Clown doll. He and other researchers have demonstrated that we are, as humans, naturally inclined to engage in observational learning. And in the famous Bobo doll experiment, Bandura demonstrated that young children would imitate the violent and aggressive actions of an adult modeling that behavior. So in the experiment, the children watched a film in which an adult repeatedly hit the large inflatable Bobo doll. After viewing the film clip, children were left alone to play in a room with a real Bobo doll, just like the one they saw getting beat up in the film. What Bandura found out was that children were more likely to imitate the adult's violent actions when the adult either received no consequences or when the adult was actually rewarded for their violent behavior. So children who saw the film clips in which the adult was punished for the aggressive behavior were less likely to repeat the behaviors later on when nobody was watching. Well, they were watching, but not watching. Let's take a look at the Bobo beatdown.
It's 1961. You're wandering around Stanford University looking for a sandwich or something when you happen to walk by a particular room in a particular lab and see something a little unnerving. Namely, you find a woman punching an inflatable clown named Bobo in the neck. Over and over in its neck. This was the lab of legendary psychologist Albert Bandura, and in 1961 he was studying one of the most important phenomena in psychology. See, while that woman was throttling that big inflatable clown, there was a child watching her, and after about 10 minutes of observing this clown-beating display, the kid was taken to a room full of fun toys, which were soon taken away, and then the frustrated kid was left alone with Bobo, and Bandura watched what happened. And yeah, what happened was kind of scary. Kids who watched the woman beating the clown were much more likely to mimic her aggression, kicking, punching, throwing, even attempting to maul Bobo with a hammer. But other children who saw an adult playing nicely with the doll or just ignoring it didn't respond the same way in their frustration. Bandura's results may seem predictable now, but in those days they challenged the dominant behaviorist views that we talked about last week. The views that learning is solely about conditioning and association, rewards and punishments. Bandura's research focused on how learning can occur through observing and imitating someone else's behavior. And if that seems obvious to you, you have Bandura to thank for that. His research hastened the evolution of 20th century experimental psychology from pure behaviorism into what we now know as social cognitive learning. While it was closely related to behaviorism, the social cognitive models added profoundly new dimensions to what Skinner and Watson and Pavlov had observed in our feathered and furry friends. In other words, it showed us that just as there's more than one way to beat up a clown, there's more than one way to learn.
Bandura identified 3 basic models in observational learning. A live model, which involves an actual individual demonstrating or acting out a behavior, a verbal instructional model, which involves descriptions and explanations of a behavior, and a symbolic model, which involves real or fictional characters displaying behaviors either in books, films, or television programs, and now with online media, online. So all people are more likely to imitate when they are rewarded for their behavior. We are more likely to imitate people we perceive as warm and nurturing and people who receive rewards for their behavior. So we want to, as human beings, we want to rise to the occasion and imitate the warm and friendly behavior that we recognize. When you have been rewarded for imitating the behavior in the past, when you lack confidence in your knowledge or abilities, people who are in an authoritative position in your life, people who are similar to you in age, sex, and interests, people who admire or who are of a higher social status than you, right? When the situation is confusing, ambiguous, or unfamiliar, children are likely to imitate aggressive actions that they viewed on a film clip in a lab setting. Doesn't it also stand to reason then that they would imitate the violence that they observe in popular films, television, video games? In 2005, the American Psychological Association issued a warning report concluding that exposure to violent interactive video games increased aggressive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in most teenagers. Okay, so many researchers were finding out, for instance, that at the beginning of an extinction trial, an animal would respond to the stimulus with greater vigor than it had during a long series of reinforcements. A rat that had been getting a food pellet each and every time it pressed the bar would, if no pellet emerged, press the bar again with extra force the second time, and again even harder until the reward was given. Although according to strict behaviorist theory, the absence of the reward should have weakened the response, not strengthened it. But of course, with human beings, we do the same thing. When a vending machine fails to deliver us our cookies or our Doritos or whatever you get out of a vending machine, you punch it, you make sure the dollar is shoved in there, you get more quarters, you shake the whole machine. I've seen people tip it over, right, if they lost their $1.50. People do all sorts of crazy stuff when they don't get their reward, when they don't get the thing that they want. So there's no place in behavioral theory for such internal processes, particularly not for thinking about a problem. Yet, a number of behaviorists noticed that their rats that they were using in experiments sometimes behaved as if they were indeed doing rudimentary, purposeful thinking. Okay, so when I showed you the two cats hitting the bell to get the piece of fish, they looked like they were little human cats. I can't explain it, but they looked human, the way that they were behaving. So the rats sometimes behaved as if they were doing these purposeful thinkings. Okay, so does viewing media violence trigger violent behavior? What do you think? Virtually since the dawn of television, parents, legislators, mental health professionals have wanted to understand the impact of violent television programs, particularly on children, aggressive behavior and violent behavior. The psychologist Albert Bandura's work in the 1970s with the rise of television watching in our society, right? General Scientific Advisory Committee on Television and Social Behavior was formed in 1969 to assess the impact of violence on the attitudes, values, and behavior of viewers. The resulting report and the follow-up report subsequently in 1982 by the National Institute of Mental Health identified these major effects of seeing violence on television. Children may become less sensitive to the pain and suffering of others. Children may become fearful of the world around them. Children may become more likely to behave in aggressive or harmful ways towards others. Interestingly, though, being aggressive as a child did not predict watching more violent TV as a teenager, suggesting that TV watching could be a causal consequence of aggressive behavior. You need to rewind that, go ahead. That being aggressive as a child did not predict watching more violent TV as a teenager, which would be suggesting that TV watching could cause rather than a consequence of aggressive behavior. However, later research by psychologists Douglas Gentile and Brad Bushman, amongst others, suggested that exposure to media violence is just one of several factors that can contribute to aggressive behavior. Okay, other research has found that exposure to media violence can desensitize people to violence in the real world, right, in wars. For some people, watching violence in the media becomes enjoyable. It doesn't result in an anxious arousal that would be expected from somebody seeing that kind of imagery. Cognition and conditioning, researchers once thought of conditioning as automatic, not involving much in the way of higher mental processes. However, now researchers believe that conditioning does involve some information processing. It does have something to do with who we are as human beings and people and separate personalities. Okay. There's more to learning than associating a response with a consequence. There's also cognition, latent learning. Latent learning refers to knowledge that only becomes clear when a person has an incentive to display it. Latent learning is important because in most cases, the information that we have learned is not always recognizable until the moment that we need to display it. Tolman, remember him? He observed that after a rat had run a maze a few times, he would pause at a point of decision of wanting to go left or right, and he would look this way and he would look that way. He might even turn back for a second, all before making his choice to go on in a particular direction. In his presidential address to the APA in 1938, Tolman said it seemed clear that the rat was performing vicariously through trial and error inside of his own head. Tolman concluded that it could be explained solely in terms of processing of what was going on in the rat's head. Tolman said it seemed really clear that the rat was performing vicariously through trial and error inside his own head. Tolman concluded that it could be explained solely in terms of the processes that were going on inside the rat's head. When we think about the learning process, we often only focus on the learning that's immediately obvious, right? We want to reward that immediate behavior. When we teach a rat to run through a maze by offering rewards for correct responses, we need to train a student to raise his or her hand in class by offering, say, praise for good behaviors. But not all behaviors get an immediate reward that is apparent, right? We train a student to raise his or her hand in a classroom by offering praise for the appropriate behaviors. But not all learning is an immediate apparent. Okay, sometimes learning only becomes evident when we need to utilize it. According to psychologists, this is called hidden learning, and it only manifests itself when reinforcement is offered. This is known as latent learning. Abstract learning, understanding complex cognitive concepts or qualities rather than concrete stimuli. Okay, so in order to do higher ordered thinking, there's more abstract learning and understanding complex cognitive concepts or qualities rather than just concrete stimuli. Animals can learn to respond to these more abstract ideas or concepts beyond the simple stimulus response premise insight. Learning, right? Kohler's important here. That's the guy with the chimpanzees. The realization of the problems, right? First he saw the bananas were up there, right? He needed to get up there, so he looked around. He stacked up some boxes first, then he climbed up onto the boxes, and he still couldn't reach it, so he got a stick with a hook, and then he was able to reach it. Right? That's a lot of thinking that went on for a primate. We would expect that from a human through trial and error. But the fact that animals are able to learn through trial and error, it was magnificent and incredibly insightful. Okay, so with Wolfgang Kohler, also a sudden realization of the problem solution, that light bulb moment, the things that just come to you, is stimulus response conditioning alone is not responsible for behavior. Some level of unobservable cognitive processes are at work. The Premack principle, which means that a person will perform a less desirable activity in order to perform the more desirable activity as a consequence. It's a benefit to know what is desirable and what is not desirable for each person, because individuals are motivated to perform an activity if they know that that is a more desirable activity. Okay, so the activity will follow as a consequence. Seligman said that the concept of learned helplessness was discovered accidentally by psychologists Martin Seligman and Stephen Mayer. They had initially observed helpless behavior in dogs that were classically conditioned to expect an electrical shock after hearing a tone. So the pairing of the tone with the shock, the zap, placed in a shuttle box that contained 2 chambers separated by a low barrier. The floor was electrified on only one side, not on the other. Okay, so the floor on one of the sides was electrocuted, and on the other side it was not. The dogs previously subjected to the classical conditioning made no attempts to escape, even though avoiding the shock simply involved jumping over a small barrier, a small fence. Okay, learned helplessness is when an animal is repeatedly subjected to an aversive stimulus, so much so that it can't escape the stimulus. Eventually, the animal will stop trying to avoid the stimulus and behave as if it is just utterly helpless. Even human beings do that, right? We see this all the time when kids just throw up their hands in the air and give up, even when the opportunities to escape are presented. This learned helplessness will prevent any action. While this concept is strongly tied in to animal psychology and behavior, it can be applied to many situations involving human beings as well. When people feel that they have no control, people will often give up completely, feel fear and anxiety, a state of burnout, no emotional healing, and frankly, an unwillingness to act. Those same systems with the goal of being able to manipulate them at will. Biofeedback is great for this. Which is basically when you get hooked up to a machine and you watch the heart rate go up and down, and you learn to control and have control over your own emotions and calm yourself down. There's been a lot of success with biofeedback in helping people learn to know that they have control over their own anxiety and depression. Each year, approximately 44 million American adults will experience a serious mental health condition, and less than half will seek treatment due to stigma and discrimination. So just know that there's always someone there to help, and lots of places you can get help, and don't feel embarrassed because it's nothing to be ashamed of. Well, that's all I've got for you today, kids. I'll see you in school tomorrow. Have a great night. Bye now.